I'm going to talk a bit about a topic which is the subject of my next book. So plug, yes, it's going to be a plug. And I came across this quote recently: any religion-based answer to the problem of our neglect of inner values can never be universal and so will be inadequate. What we need today is an approach to ethics which makes no recourse to religion and can be equally acceptable to those with faith and those without. A secular ethics by the Dalai Lama. So basically what I've done is I've looked at question 4 from my Pain in the Ass book, how should I behave? You know, it's really the topic of ethics. And if we define ethics as essentially value judgments on human behavior, and those values have degrees, good, bad, right, wrong, fair, and unfair, then what methods should we use in developing a system for measuring the value of human actions? That person is a virtuous person. That's a bad person. Oh, he shouldn't have done that. Oh, did you hear what he did? Or when we value human actions, what methods are available to us and what methods should we develop in determining or measuring the value of those actions? So, you know, we're talking about the differences in some ways between what I call, you know, godless and godful ethics. The godful ethics we know, things like divine command theory, where you have a bunch of deities or a singular deity, and they basically have done things in a particular way, and they have their own reasons for doing this. And these are stated in things like the Ten Commandments, you know, the Quran, the New Testament. And these run into problems, what's known as the Euthyphro problem. You know, do we do things because God wants them that way, or are they good in themselves and God's able to understand them that way? Then why do we need a God? So it runs into all kinds of problems when we have these kind of God-based ethics. Godless ethics have been around for quite a while, actually. You have utilitarianism, or the greatest good for the greatest number. Deontology, you act according to a certain set of principles or rules. There are those who are cultural relativists. We just do whatever a particular cultural group maintains as good. Virtue ethics, you act in a way of the way in which people of virtue act, and then you model your behavior after them. There's subjectivism and emotivism. The David Hume approach, where we don't see ethics in nature in particular. So there's a lot of different schools of thought out there. Now, what are we but basically just Homo sapiens, which is just another species. And so based on this, we have to think about, you know, what are the constraints under which any of us act at any given time? What are the constraints? So that when we make judgments, value judgments about human behavior, we need to have an understanding of what those constraints are, because the more accurately we can determine the amount of degree or control anyone has at any given time over their apparent volitions, wills, desires, actions, and so on, the more responsible we are being in valuing, right, giving judgment to those particular actions. So, I'm going to look briefly at universal principles and the concept of the idea of, can we establish universal principles? So no matter what value system we come up with, right, science, I believe, is going to play an integral part by helping us to understand those constraints through which any moral agent, any one of us, behaves at any given time. So are there universal principles of ethics? And if so, what are they? And if not, then what do we do? So how do we determine whether, you know, the universality of principles? Well, we can use anthropologists and geographers and historians and philosophers, and we survey worldwide, and we try to establish common principles amongst all diverse ethnicities and see which ones of those are common, or the most common, around the world, irrespective of the type of ethnicities and cultures in which people were raised. What are some possible universal principles? Well, the concept of fairness. We know that humans have this built-in concept of equity or fairness. We don't like to see people get ripped off. There's something in us that irks us when we see an inequity. The concept of the golden rule, this idea of reciprocity. You know, I'm not going to be nasty to you if you're not going to be nasty to me, and this works out extremely well. The idea of cooperation, which is built into the concept of the golden rule, that the more we cooperate, the more we'll actually get out of a given society. The more we try to go it alone, some will succeed very much, the 1%, and the others will not. So, and then the concept, of course, of the no harm principle, that this generally ties into the golden rule. You can't just be a scumbag and murder people and say, yeah, I'd want people to murder me too, so it's okay. No. You don't get to do that, right? So many object to a secular ethical system, and we know why. I mean, this is why we have conferences like this. They claim secular ethics to be nihilistic. A little while ago, I was involved in a debate. Matt Delahunty and I debated a couple of Christian theologians, and we talked about various ethical systems and whatnot, and one of the gentlemen kept trying to paint me as being nihilistic, right? And if there's no clear evidence of any supernatural or divine rules for moral or ethical behavior, which I don't see any. I mean, I've looked carefully, and I haven't found any. Then it befalls upon us to devise our own moral systems and value judgments out of nothing. So nothing's trickling down, right? But people feel that nihilism is bad, and you should feel bad, okay? And the reason why is because it generates fear. And the reason why is because the ethical positions of various religious people suffer generally from hubris. They're prideful. We're the chosen people. God has given us the rules. Human audacity, that they think they can get absolute supernatural knowledge of what reality is actually like. And HUAS, or head up ass syndrome, where they just don't realize that we don't have this type of information. It'd be a different world, wouldn't it, if every day we got up, we knew exactly what the absolute rules to society were, and we could just simply follow them. And they were justified, and we could just converse with God. God, I'm a little bit unclear. Oh, you clarified. Thank you. And then we're all clear on that. We're all on the same page. We see it in a pristine. Of course, this is a quick aside. I hope I don't go too long. But don't you think, if there were an all-powerful, omniscient, omnibenevolent, omnipresent God, think about it just for a sec. In The Matrix, Keanu Reeves knows Kung Fu like that, right? It's like, I know Kung Fu. Couldn't God just inject that morality into us so that we just see what he wants us to see, right? Why all the trials? Oh, it has to be that way. No, he's God. He doesn't have to put us through all this. It could be like, I know Kung Fu, I know ethics, right? You could just, and you've got it. And it's done, and it's over. Nice job, God. Good on you. Yes, of course I see it. You're God, right? But it doesn't do that. But it could do that because it has the power. And then we would all be good people, right? And we wouldn't be, doing horrible things to other people. So what this comes down to is we need to make up the rules ourselves, ex nihilo, out of nothing, as it were. Now, this raises the very interesting problem of free will. And there's a battle going on in the world and in academia over what's called dualism and identity theory. Dualism is the position that maintains that humans are composed of two things, matter and mind, or soul, or spirit, or some other kind of substance. Identity theory maintains that mind and brain are the same thing. There's no distinction between them. There's no ghost in the machine. There's no pilot in the ship. There's just the machine. There's just the ship. Right? Now, do you folks know who Eben Alexander is? Have you heard of this book, The Science of Heaven? It's a bestseller right now. A neurosurgeon goes into a septic shock coma for 7 days, rides on the wings of butterflies, goes to heaven, comes back, and has written a best-selling book on this. Now, I was on the radio with Dr. Alexander, Ontario Today on CBC, and he kept talking about consciousness and soul, consciousness and soul. They're one and the same thing, they're one and the same thing. Even though I was dead, my consciousness or soul continued to exist in this other world place, which is heaven. Now, I'm happy for Dr. Alexander, and in a way, that would be kind of neat if this kind of thing happened, but there are so many questions that the central one I had for him was, are you a man of science? Yes, I'm a man of science. So you believe in biology? Yes. Then you believe in evolution as an aspect of biology. Therefore, if a soul is a dualistic account, where did it come from? At what point in our evolutionary past? Did it enter in when we were Australopithecines, right? Did it come through Homo heidelbergensis All right? At what point did the soul become a part of it? Because these are important questions that a person would need to answer. You can't just throw out things like, oh, we have a soul along with a body. You have some homework to do. So it befalls Dr. Alexander then to flesh this out. He said that's an excellent question. And you know, quantum physicists talk about time. And time is like an abstract concept. And time is neither here nor there, nor it's not real. And you know, that's fascinating insofar as, and the host says, well, speaking of time, it looks like we're almost out of it. He never answered the question, right? The red herring that he took went so far off the beaten path it wasn't funny, but anyhow. If we eliminate dualist accounts of humanity, this is extremely frightening, not just to religious communities, but to thousands of humanities and social science departments as well, so it's found in academia as well. I think there's a capacity for understanding ourselves in a natural context which will have a huge impact on the way in which laws are developed, at least social policies, bills, and laws. So people talk about this kind of spiritual je ne sais quoi, this kind of thing that's dwelling within the physical substance that we are, a ghost in the machine, which is the root of moral responsibility and accountability. You know, that no matter what, your physical body is not responsible. It's the thing that dwells inside you that is held accountable, that is not affected by physical properties or physical laws. Now, you might think that sounds kind of weird, but our laws are sort of based on a dualistic account. So when you run a red light and a cop pulls you over and you basically say to him, it couldn't really be helped if you think about all the laws of natural mechanics and so on, you know, and the position in which I was at that particular time, officer. They'll still write you up a ticket because he thinks you were in control and you should have known better, and you are guilty of running that red light. You chose to run that red light. But this is where things get interesting. What if we just looked at a purely naturalistic account of ethics? I'm basing my book entirely on the concept that there's no such thing as free will. And if there isn't, how are we going to develop a system of ethics? If it turns out that there isn't anything like free will, that our physical bodies and our brains are the things that are responsible for our actions, do we possess any free will? How people respond to that question of free will determines the type of ethical systems we believe we can develop and abide by or not abide by. There are three positions regarding free will. So a quick kind of philosophy primer right here. Libertarianism, not the political kind, but the idea of liberty, that humans have total 100% free will. Soft determinism, the idea that humans act freely according to deterministic laws. I can now choose to jump up and down and know that gravity is going to continue to pull me downwards. I'm not going to float up and fly away. So I act freely according to these physical constraints that I can manipulate. And third, hard determinism. Humans have no free will under deterministic constraints whatsoever. So soft determinism is known as compatibilism. You're free but constrained. Hard determinism is incompatible. You have no free will because the constraints are fixed and you really have no choice whatsoever. So I look at the kind of the hard deterministic look at humanity and think about what kind of an ethical system would we develop if this were the case. This then would make us self-reflective robots, essentially. We evolved out of a completely blind mechanistic behavior as pre-conscious beings. We weren't always as conscious as we are now. We did not have this capacity to self-reflect and to have what's known as a meta-awareness of ourselves. What we can do is peer into our own workings. We can look into the machine. We can tinker with it. It's like an alarm clock setting itself. We have that capacity, right, to consider what kind of control we have over this machinery. So we can identify when the machine is not working properly, either in ourselves or in others. So we notice unusual behavior when our parents develop Alzheimer's or dementia. We know that the machine is not working as it has in the past, right? What does properly mean? Well, within given specific parameters, those which are naturally understood and those which are culturally derived, and we can take measures to guide human conduct and behavior in ways conducive to how we're going to define a moral system. If we develop universal principles and we have a moral system and we want to act according to those principles, and some of us can and some of us can't, then it behooves us to figure out, why aren't they acting according to those principles? I thought we all agreed that those principles were good ones. So why isn't somebody acting in accordance to them? And if it has anything to do with the machinery, the way the machinery works, then we have an obligation to try to fix the machinery. I call this the umbra of becoming. How much control does anybody have once they're self-reflective and know that they're a machine acting in a particular way? Umbra just means shadow. So that shadowy world in which we either have control or lose control, right? So when people act in horrible, horrific ways, and then you find out they had a grapefruit-sized tumor inside their prefrontal cortex, and you just, okay, yep, now it makes a little more sense. We can understand that that's a very simplistic case, but there is a very clear cause and effect case where that umbra of becoming, that shadowy area, gradually went away from that person until that incapacity to control themselves caused them to do actions against those principles that we have set up within a particular society. With this realization comes considerable responsibility, but it's a different type of responsibility, and it's not to be taken lightly. So how then do we develop a method for devising ethical principles, and then what method do we establish, right, for upholding those particular principles should we use? So this is an immense responsibility that we have to take upon ourselves, especially if it turns out that number 3 is correct and we live as individuals in a hard, deterministic universe. So then the final part of my talk today is, okay, so how are we going to get information that's going to advise us as to what the best ways in which to develop ethical systems and then to care for people whose machinery might not be working particularly well? And I've developed this thing called the OzTalk Project, or the Onion Skin Theory of Knowledge Project. And it's a system of information that will hopefully allow us to effectively judge the value of any given action at any given time in any given context. So not an easy thing to do. But I think I'm basically saying, aren't kittens cute here? I'm basically saying, isn't this the direction we need to pretty much go towards if we wish to be fair to humanity, to ourselves, and to others? So we need a natural and cultural understanding of the complexities and the constraints, the variables, all of the influences within specific contexts in order to develop agreements on how we should come to value the actions of humans, ourselves and those of others. So we need a natural and cultural understanding of complex relationships in terms of systems analysis. So what I call the relations of natural and cultural systems. And it sort of looks like this. The RNS, or the relations of natural systems, you might have heard this in other talks that I've given, or if you've gotten my book. It allows us to better understand linear and nonlinear relationships of causal factors in the physical and social sciences. It allows us to gain a better understanding of causality in order to develop better models and policies for the responsible management of human and natural resources. The precursor of this particular project can be found on relationsofnaturalsystems.com, where I ask various people in various organizations in various disciplines a number of questions about what they think in terms of causality. I've actually had a physicist once tell me, yes, everything in this universe is predetermined. What about humans? No. How so? I just don't see. Do you know what dualism is? Not really. No, well, we need to talk, right? So what follows then is us, like every other species, try to attain and maintain what's called a biological equilibrium. So within any given niche, organisms try to establish this particular biological organism. When it breaks down, species can go extinct. So like any other species, this is what humans try to basically attain. And so here's the relations of natural systems. You have us here. what are we but a conglomerate of systems, right? Skeletal, endocrine, neural, respiratory, circulatory. We're a conglomerate of systems. And if you break each of our systems down into their component parts, into cellular, and further down into molecular and atomic, and then we smash atoms, and then we get into the theoretical realm of either string theory, which Lawrence Krauss doesn't like very much, but or quantum loop gravity, right? We're seeing just a smaller and smaller collection of systems. And physics works a bit differently at these varying levels, right? And when we look at ourselves as a conglomerate of systems, and we go up into the larger realms, into ecosystems, and planetary systems, and star systems, and then all space-time, here a person gets an idea in a single glance of where they're at in terms of the relationship of all these various natural systems that the sciences have been able to understand and describe in various ways. And of course, the greatest hope of physics is this kind of grand unified theory. If we could try to figure out what connects everything at all these varying levels, that would be this, this grand unified theory. But the fact of the matter is, here we are, and we know what we are made of, and we know that when our systems aren't working properly, the world can be seen very differently from the way it would normally be seen if our systems were function in a, quote, kind of normal way. So that's the relations of natural systems. And then, of course, you have the relations of cultural systems. Family, ethnicity, education, economics, and so on and so forth. In other words, lots and lots of memes that are developed and that we invent. And I take memes in a very, very broad context. Everything that humans can invent. Everything we can invent. Stuff, things, even ideas, the way you comb your hair, all of those types of things. So we interact according to the complex relationships of these various cultural systems. So just as we had a biological equilibrium, we develop what I call a mimetic equilibrium, a comfort zone with all of our memes. So we educate ourselves in a particular way. We like art, certain aspects of art in a particular way. We share company with people. We like food in a certain type of way. And we develop this mimetic equilibrium. So here's the relations of cultural systems. Here we are. And family, ethnicity, all these things, politics, agriculture, religion, industry, law, transportation, communication, arts. So just a huge number of cultural systems. I could not have attended this conference if somebody hadn't invented automobiles. So, I could drive the vast distance. Otherwise, this conference would take a lot longer to put together through modes of communication that we did not have 100 years ago, even. So the Oz talk, then, is the combination of the relations of natural systems with the relations of cultural systems. So imagine these systems are put together into a big bowl like an onion. And they're incredibly complex, and they interrelate to each other. So extremely complex. So that makes us, as well as every other species, a system manipulator. How we manipulate those systems determines how far we succeed in terms of our value as to human actions. So we exploit the constraints inside of the onion skin theory of knowledge in light of perceived value. And of course, this is extremely complex. We can talk about how deep can we go into the onion? How much do we know about quantum physics? Well, I only go so far into the onion. But many physicists go deeper, way, way deeper. But we can also talk about the breadth of knowledge in terms of not only going deep into the onion, but how our depth connects around that onion to give us a more interesting view of various aspects of the world. So we can't know all of the influences of all the constraints at one particular time. We're not omniscient, but we can understand what I call causal clusters at any given time. And many popular works look at these kind of connections in these complex systems, right? Levitt, with Freakonomics, and Mlodino's The Drunkard's Walk. Brofman's Sway, and connected with Christakis and Fowler. So lots of people are doing interesting work in these areas, and there are tons of organizations that deal with very, very complex systems. So what I'm trying to do with my project is coordinate. I want to be the hub. I want to be the one who connects a lot of these systems together so we can solve major problems in the world and try to come up with a system actually of universal ethics. So value tends to be measured on a scale. There are degrees which we can use, And these might just be purely aesthetic. Ethics might just come down to how people emotionally feel about certain things, right? But we need to understand that these are the sum total of who and what we are as functioning systems within this huge conglomerate network of this onion, of this kind of natural and cultural system of networks. So how will the onion skin theory of knowledge contribute to more responsible development of a basic agreement on how we should value the actions of humans? Well, when we understand these constraints and these complex networks, we'll have a much more robust context from which to make judgments about human behavior. So the bottom line is, the more comprehensive the model is regarding the constraints, the better enabled we will be in making value judgments regarding human actions and developing responsible social policies for managing natural and human resources. But this is going to take a lot of time. It's going to take organization, dedication, and it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be cheap, but it's probably going to save lots and lots and lots of money by preventing us from looking in places that lead to dead ends. So obviously a bit of shameless self-promotion. This is the big project that I'm working on now. It's currently associated with a not-for-profit group, and I'm gaining seed money now from philanthropists, foundations, and government. So I will need to talk to the millionaires here at the break, so please don't go anywhere. So it's to be used as an open source tool to present information in as, yes, there's the Fox News catchphrase, in as fair and balanced a manner as possible. It's to act like a consumer's report for responsibly attained information, to be reliable, trustworthy, and wary of its own inherent biases. So controls are going to be put in place to try to account for this. People really do want to be able to trust information they receive. I think this is something that humans generally will value. So it's dedicated to providing this kind of information so that social policies, we're in Ottawa, and I've already got parliamentary interest in this. Yeah, believe it or not. So, yes, thank you. So the idea is to start with the Senate and work with commissions, and when commissions are struck and they want to know, okay, how are we going to figure out aspects of this particular bill, I want to provide that network. I want to be that kind of nexus. So if we can attain universal agreement regarding some ethical precepts, then how do we go about understanding the extent to which each of us can comply to those particular guidelines? So Immanuel Kant said, essentially, because something is a way, that doesn't necessarily mean we ought to act that way. But if you ought to act a certain way, it means you should be able to, right? Ought implies that you can act in a particular way. So how we learn to base, to judge based on this newly developed natural system? Well, we can consider levels to which one was capable of self-reflection and premeditation. What capacity did you have to realize the effects of your particular actions at any given time, right? And this raises this question of the umbra becoming. How much self-reflective control did you think you have, even if free will is an illusion? There's a University of Utah survey which basically said that judges in 19 states found that if a convicted criminal is a psychopath, judges considered it a factor and would, upon receiving biological information about a person's actions, would have a less sentence on that person when that information was given. So you can see how this is actually creeping into the law as we speak. I belong to an organization called the Society for the Evolutionary Analysis of Law, where we try to raise awareness to courts, to judges, to legislators and whatnot, that we need to understand humans more in this way. And I think dualists are fearing that that will lead to moral absolution. That, oh, we can just do anything we want. Where are the kittens? I feel like kicking kittens. Where are they? Bring them to me, right? That we can just do anything. Oh, I couldn't help it. I couldn't help it. Oh, kitty. So I don't think we're headed that way. I think it is going to require a paradigm shift in thinking, though, right? And if we do genuinely wish for fairness, it's going to be difficult because many religious people like the illusion of free will, the belief in an afterlife, and a parental, all-loving creator, right? It triggers very powerful neurotransmitters. And when you cast doubt on these things, it disrupts their mimetic equilibrium, and they do not like you if you've had any experience with such people. So the more epistemically responsibly attained information that we provide regarding ethical and legal accountability, This does not compare to the zing of perceived control that dualists receive from their dopaminergic highs of illusion and comfort. So know what you're up against, right? So in establishing a truly fair and secular world ethics, right now, the really hard work begins. Thank you.